I'm Elena Dawson, and depending on who you ask, I'm either the luckiest woman alive or the most accomplished fraud in a designer dress. Most people don't know me beyond the photo in Nathan's wallet. The one where I'm smiling beside him in front of this very house. Like a well-trained accessory. That night, the dining room looked perfect. I had spent hours smoothing linens, directing the caterers, making sure the lighting hit just right. Not because I cared about impressing Nathan's family, but because I knew any flaw would become the centerpiece of their next gossip round. Served cold with their red wine and backhanded compliments, Vivian, my mother-in-law, was the first to comment. She walked in, took one sweeping glance at the floral arrangement, and said the hydrangeas were a bit loud for the season. Jonathan grunted something about how hard it must be to maintain a house this size, while Sophie gave me her usual once-over, like she was mentally calculating the resale value of my outfit. Nathan just adjusted his cufflinks and let them talk. I stayed quiet. I always did. That was the role. After all, make sure the wine is perfect, the roast is warm, and no one ever sees you flinch. They praised Nathan for the way the house was run. The wine selection, the impeccable seating plan. No one asked who planned the wine list, who studied every label for weeks. No one asked who ran the house, to manage the staff, or designed the renovation layout when they were all in Europe. That part was mine, and I knew better than to expect credit for things I wasn't supposed to be good at. Sophie leaned over at one point and whispered that she was surprised the crystal hadn't chipped by now. I smiled like I didn't hear the insult underneath. She had never forgiven me for having better taste on a tighter budget, or for not needing to flash designer logos to know my worth. Nathan gave another charming toast about family legacy, about how proud he was to carry the Dawson name. The room clapped. His parents beamed and he won a mel. And I sipped my wine without a word. I had heard the speech before. It was the same script, just a different dinner. Every detail around them, the fireplace lace, the rugs. The art was hand-picked by me, paid for by me. But Nathan never stopped them from saying otherwise. In fact, he let them believe the whole life we built was his gift to me. There's something surreal about watching your own work be credited to someone else while you pass the hors d'oeuvres. I had spent years perfecting silence. Not because I was weak, but because I needed time. Time to build. Time to learn. Time to calculate. They thought I was just another pretty wife. Someone to manage the guest list and stay out of the financials. That was always the joke Nathan told behind my back. That I married into a legacy and couldn't tell the difference between a stock split and a salad fork. He didn't know I'd been studying every financial statement in the guest bathroom between courses. That I had built something they'd never see coming. Because when people underestimate you long enough, they teach you how to hide in plain sight. That night, while Vivian asked Nathan if he remembered to order the new patio heaters, and Sophie criticized the champagne temperature, I kept adjusting the napkins on the table. Not because they needed fixing, but because I needed something to keep my hands from showing the truth. My name is Elena, and no, I didn't marry into power. I married into a stage. And now the real show is about to begin. Nathan liked to tell people I got lucky when I married him. That I stumbled into privilege, inherited a last name that opened doors, and never had to earn anything myself. He said it with a smile in public, like it was a joke. But he always meant it. That night, while everyone toasted his brilliance, I slipped away for a moment and sat by the window. I checked my phone, not for messages or missed calls, but for something more personal. My company's dashboard had just refreshed. Revenue 8 figures. Again. They thought he provided the roof over our heads. That I was the woman who decorated it while he handled the important things. What they didn't know was the mortgage had been paid off 2 years ago. In cash. By me. Every brick in that house. Every chandelier. Every inch of polished hardwood was covered by money that didn't have his name on it. But he never asked where it came from. He assumed I had a trust fund or that he'd signed something without reading it. and I let him believe it. That was the real art. Not just building something, but hiding it right under their noses. They never looked closely because they thought they already understood who I was. Nathan's ego was big enough to fill the entire house. He didn't care about the details, the paperwork, or the numbers. He cared about appearances, about standing at the head of the table and accepting praise for things he didn't do, and that made my job easier. My company started small. An idea scribbled in a notebook while waiting for a dinner party to end. I saw how artisans, mostly women, struggled to reach customers who valued quality over convenience. So I built a digital marketplace, hired a team quietly, and launched under a name no one in his family would recognize. It grew faster than I expected. I reinvested everything, created shell companies, moved ownership into trusts, and used layers of holding firms so complicated even Nathan's lawyers wouldn't see the trail. I wore soft sweaters and played hostess while finalizing international contracts in the pantry between courses. I never posted about it, never bragged, never even mentioned it to Nathan. He didn't ask, and I didn't offer. He preferred to believe I was busy with book clubs and flower arrangements, so I gave him exactly that. Behind my closet was a safe built into the wall. Inside it were signed deals, intellectual property patents, and key access codes. Nothing flashy. Just quiet control. The kind that doesn't need applause. I remember the day my app hit 1 million users. Nathan was downstairs telling guests how exhausting it was being the only breadwinner in a big family. I brought him a fresh drink and smiled. He thanked me in front of everyone, like I was staff. I didn't flinch. There is a specific power in knowing things others don't. Knowing that the wine they're drinking was selected by me from a vineyard I now partially own. Knowing the leather chairs they sit in were flown in from a designer who personally courted me as an investor. Knowing that the most powerful person in the room is the one they refuse to see. People always ask me why I didn't say anything sooner. Why I let him take the spotlight for so long. But the truth is, I was never trying to steal it. I was just building something he didn't believe I was capable of. They called me lucky. But luck had nothing to do with it. I stayed invisible on purpose. Because silence was safer than having to prove myself to people who never intended to listen. I wasn't the one who got lucky. He was. He married someone with vision, strategy, and a plan. He just didn't realize the plan didn't include him forever. Dinner was nearly over when Nathan cleared his throat. He wore that grin I hated. The one that looked charming on the outside but never reached his eyes. I knew that expression. It always meant a decision had already been made. And I wasn't part of it. In light of some recent market shifts, he said casually, I've invited Mom, Dad, and Sophie to stay with us for a while. Just until things stabilize. He said it like we were talking about a dinner reservation. Not 3 adults moving into my home without warning. I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. He didn't look at me. No one did. Vivian clinked her glass and said she'd always known this house had more space than necessary. Jonathan nodded, like the idea was long overdue. Sophie smirked and asked if we'd finally update the guest rooms to something less provincial. My fingers tightened around the stem of my wine glass. I had just installed custom fixtures in those rooms, fixtures Sophie had complimented 2 weeks ago, pretending she had picked them out first on Pinterest. I said nothing. I kept chewing. Like their words weren't unraveling something inside me. Nathan went on about logistics. How the East Wing was perfect for long-term guests. How I wouldn't even notice the change. He laughed when Jonathan asked about laundry schedules. Apparently, I would manage that too. I looked down at my plate. The linen napkins I had pressed that morning were spotless. The silverware gleamed. The china was vintage. The meal, handcrafted. And none of it mattered. In this house, my labor was invisible. Just like my consent. You're being awfully quiet, Vivian said sweetly. Her tone drenched in that syrupy pity she saved for people beneath her. I smiled. Because that was safer than screaming. Because screaming wouldn't have changed a thing. I wanted to ask Nathan when he made this decision. I wanted to ask if he remembered whose name was on the deed. Whose trust owned the land this house was built on. But I already knew the answer. He never thought to ask, because he never thought I mattered. Sophie leaned over and whispered that she hoped I wouldn't mind sharing my bathroom essentials. Vivian mentioned that she would be rearranging some of the art in the foyer for better feng shui. I nodded. Said of course. And refilled their glasses. I had spent 10 years building a life where I could breathe. And now they were moving into it like they owned the air. And he didn't even ask. The table was full of laughter. 2 of plans I wasn't part of. They clinked their glasses again. To family. To love. To survival. I raised mine too. Steady hand. Blank face. But inside, something shifted. A silent. The final crack that would never reseal. Not this time. Not again. After they all went to bed. Full and smug. I made tea just like they liked it. Chamomile for Vivian. Lemon for Jonathan. Nothing for Sophie. Of course. She only drank imported mint she insisted wasn't sold in the U.S. I placed everything neatly on the counter. Then I walked past the kitchen, past the wine cellar, and pressed my palm against a panel in the wall. It clicked open. A narrow staircase led to what Nathan always called the storage room. He'd never once stepped inside. That was his first mistake. The lights flickered on, revealing steel cabinets, a wide desk, 3 monitors, and a wall of whiteboards filled with numbers, maps, and timelines. This was the part of the house I built just for me, where I was allowed to be dangerous. I sat down, opened my laptop, and pulled up the current acquisition file. Dawson Global Holdings was ready. All I needed was one signature. The transfer papers for their company had been quietly circulating for months, accumulating just enough controlling interest to make my next move legal. Silent. And irreversible. I called Rebecca. She answered on the first ring. She didn't say hello. Just asked. Are you sure I was? I had never been more sure of anything in my life. Send the schedule. Lock the filings. Hold the courier for 10 a.m. When I hung up, I opened the last version of the document Nathan once mocked me for. He had called it a cute little PDF. Now it was a corporate roadmap that would swallow everything he thought belonged to him. That was the night I stopped asking for space. Stopped asking for credit. Stopped pretending to be less. I didn't need his permission. I already had the power. He just hadn't noticed yet. But he would. Soon. 6 months ago. I sat across from Tommy in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe. The kind with more shadows than light. He looked uneasy. Fingers tapping against a thick envelope. Like he was trying to drum away whatever guilt he felt for what he was about to hand me. He didn't know I had already crossed the line from curious to certain. Are you sure you want to see this? He asked. His voice low. I nodded once and pushed a flash drive toward him. On it was everything I had promised in exchange. Passwords. Proof. The kinds of things that don't come cheap or clean. He inserted it into his laptop, and his eyebrows lifted within seconds. Offshore accounts. Unexplained transfers. Hidden debts layered beneath more hidden debts. How long had Nathan been playing this game? Tommy turned the screen toward me. The first page was a breakdown of personal loans Nathan had taken out using inflated valuations of his company's page worth. Some of those numbers were fabricated. Others were based on assets that had already been sold or mortgaged multiple times. He borrowed from his sister's trust fund. He blinked. Wait. Sophie's college trust gone. Cleared out 2 years ago to fund a trip to Monaco that was, according to Nathan, a business retreat. The next page showed wire transfers routed through 3 different accounts to cover private jet rentals, gambling markers, and hotel stays in places I'd never even heard him mention. That weekend, he said he was visiting his uncle in Florida, Turns out he lost $70,000 in a single night in Macau. I could barely hear Tommy anymore. The sound of my own heartbeat filled the silence between each scan. Each number. What about the house? I asked. You mean your house? He looked at me. Eyes narrowing. It's in your holding company. But he's leveraged it 3 times. He forged documents showing shared ownership to get better credit terms. That part hit me hardest. Not the money. Not even the betrayal. The assumption that I wouldn't find out. That even if I did, I wouldn't know what to do with the truth. He's also been siphoning funds from the family's company. Tommy added, almost like an afterthought. Slow. Small amounts. But over time, it adds up. I looked at the totals. Hundreds of thousands gone. Disguised as bonuses. As vendor payments. As business development fees. I kept flipping pages. Faster now. Like each sheet would set something inside me, ablaze. There were receipts, flight manifests, hotel invoices, even a credit card statement with a charge at a jewelry store in Zurich. He never gave me anything from there. I remembered him telling me our budget was tight that month. I leaned back, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Not angry. Not yet. Just realigned. I had spent so long making myself small to keep the peace. To play the part he cast me in. But peace is not the same as safety. Peace doesn't require deception. I wasn't angry. I was ready. So what now? Tommy asked. I smiled without humor. Now we gather. Every document. Every loan. Every fraud. He nodded and slid over a thicker folder. Then you'll want this too. The Maxwell merger, he keeps bragging about it, collapsed. 3 months ago, investors walked after seeing the numbers. He never told anyone. He's pretending it's still active. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I went home, kissed him goodnight, and poured us both a glass of wine. While he talked about market trends and his future expansion plans, I took mental notes of the things he still didn't know I knew. The real power isn't in confrontation. It's in knowing when not to use it. Yet, I didn't rush. That's not how you dismantle a dynasty. You start by knowing where the cracks are. And I already had the blueprints. For weeks, I worked late into the night behind the false wall in the wine cellar. Files spread out like battle maps. Each one revealing another angle of their weak foundation. The first thing I did was form a new holding company. Quietly and carefully. Under a name no one in the Dawson family would ever recognize. Through that shell, I began acquiring shares in their business. Not directly. I used intermediaries. Investors I trusted. People who owed me favors or believed in my vision. Every purchase came with an NDA. Every meeting disguised as something else. Sometimes I posed as my own assistant. Sometimes I emailed under the name of a fictional executive assistant named Claire. They responded. They always respond to Claire. I contacted stakeholders Nathan hadn't spoken to in years. Many of them had grown tired of his excuses. His late filings. His endless promises. When I presented a discreet buyout offer, they didn't hesitate. One by one, control slipped from his fingers and into mine. He was too distracted, spinning his illusion of success, to notice it unraveling thread by thread. I documented everything. Every transfer. Every fake invoice. Every falsified report. I knew the patterns of his lies better than he did. I knew when he would fake a vendor contract to justify missing funds. And I knew how many zeros he liked to add when inflating projections. I made a spreadsheet with color-coded notes. Not because I needed proof, but because they would. I never tried to warn him. I never confronted anyone. They wouldn't have believed me. They didn't want to. They were too invested in the version of me that stayed in the background. Folded linens, poured wine, and smiled politely. So I stopped talking. I stopped trying. I let the silence do the work. Because silence when held long enough, becomes power. And I knew when the truth finally arrived, it would speak louder than I ever could. The table was set for brunch. Croissants warmed in a linen-lined basket, fruit arranged in symmetrical spirals, and the smell of fresh espresso lingered in the air like a carefully curated illusion. I had the staff place the champagne just right. Napkins folded into swans. Vivian liked the touch of elegance, even if she never said thank you. I checked the time. 9:59 a.m. Right on schedule. They arrived at 9:45. Chattering like royalty. Sophie complained about the pillows in the guest room. Jonathan asked for a stronger roast. Nathan tried to wrap his arm around me as he complimented the table, as if he had helped make any of it happen. I poured myself a cup of coffee, not bothering to answer. At exactly 10:00, the front gate opened. 3 black sedans rolled to a stop. From one stepped a woman in a navy suit, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 couriers carrying a neat stack of manila envelopes. The driver handed her the last one, and she approached the veranda. "Good morning," she said with crisp efficiency. "I have deliveries for Vivian Dawson, Jonathan Dawson, Sophie Dawson, and Nathan Dawson. Signatures required." The clink of forks paused mid-air. Sophie reached first, still chewing, her eyes flicking to mine, searching for a hint of explanation. I smiled and sipped my coffee. One by one, they opened their envelopes. I watched the reactions ripple across their faces like a slow-moving storm. Sophie's fingers trembled as she read the headline in bold. Jonathan's jaw went slack, blinking as if the words were somehow wrong. Vivian gasped so sharply, her pearls tilted. Nathan was the last to understand. He read it twice. "This is a mistake," Vivian said, voice tight. "Eviction notice?" I asked gently, placing my cup down. "No mistake. You have 72 hours to vacate. The guest wing, the house, the property, all of it." Nathan stood, clutching his papers. "You can't do this. I own this place." I turned toward him, keeping my voice light. "Actually, you lease it, through Dawson Holdings, which I own, through a separate entity that now controls this estate." He stared at me, blinking as if he were seeing me for the first time. "What is Dawson Holdings my company?" I said simply, "One of them." Sophie shot up, her chair scraping back. "Wait. You own this house. You own the summer house, the office building my startup rents, yes. And yes? And yes?" He tilted my hill. "Would you like a full list?" Jonathan's hands shook as he reread the document. "This says we have no legal claim to residency." He looked to Nathan. "Is this real?" Nathan looked at me, face flushed with confusion and something else, fear. "I thought you were just the wife." "That was your first mistake?" I adjusted my napkin. "Your second was underestimating the woman who built the foundation you've been standing on for years." Silence settled over the veranda, like ash after a fire. I took another sip of coffee, unbothered. While the empire they believed was theirs collapsed in the morning sun, Nathan's voice cracked as he pointed at the documents in his hands. "You can't just take everything. I built this. This house. This life. You were nothing before me." I lifted the teapot and poured another cup, steady and calm, letting the sound of liquid fill the gap where his delusion once lived. "Really?" I said, without looking up. "Let's test that theory." I reached for the folder I'd placed on the table earlier, already knowing he would try this. Inside was a full record of property ownership. Every shell company, every financial transaction tied to Dawson Holdings, each one traced back to me. He lunged forward, eyes scanning the pages like he could. "Will them to change? This is fake. You forged this." His voice grew louder, less controlled. I shook my head. "You think I'd leave room for doubt? There are notarized filings, email threads, Contracts signed by you. If you'd like to check the signatures. Vivian stood abruptly. This is absurd. You're the wife. My smile didn't falter. No. I'm the one who paid the mortgage you thought your son paid. The one who covered your charity galas and your credit card bills when they were overdrawn. The one who owns your beloved Hamptons home through a Wyoming LLC. Check the deed. Sophie opened her mouth to speak. But Nathan shouted over her. You tricked us. You made us believe I didn't make you believe anything. You assumed that I was small. That I was playing house. That I didn't understand what was happening under my own roof. He was sweating now. Reading too fast. Flipping pages like he could outrun what they revealed. The mortgages. The gambling losses. The business debts. The wire transfers. Every bit of it laid out in black and white. I leaned back. Let the cup settle into its saucer. And finally looked him in the eye. You thought I was decorating. I was documenting. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. And I didn't need to look up to know it was him. I could feel the desperation before he even stepped through. Nathan walked into the new Dawson Global headquarters, wearing a suit that once would have looked expensive. But now only looked borrowed from a past he no longer owned. His tie was slightly askew. His face less practiced. You've destroyed my life, he said before the door even closed behind him. I gestured toward the chair across from mine. I didn't destroy anything. I just revealed what was already broken. Sit. He hesitated. Like he wasn't sure whether he should argue or collapse. I slid a tablet across the table. On it was the stock valuation of his family company, now mine. The numbers glowed higher than they had in years. 42% up since the takeover. Nathan stared at it like it was a foreign language. It was mine to fix. Mine to run, he muttered. You had years to fix it. And all you did was bury it deeper in debt. I leaned back in my chair. So I fixed it. Quietly. Thoroughly. Legally. Those were my connections. He shot back. My network. Were they? I tapped the screen, revealing a long list of investor emails, all dated months before the takeover. All conversations he never knew about. Many of them were addressed to Claire. My fictional assistant. They thought they were working with your assistant, he whispered. No. They were working with me. They just didn't realize it. Because you never thought I belonged in the room. He stood suddenly, pacing. You manipulated everything. I built everything. I corrected. While you were faking invoices and lying to your board. I was managing 5 departments and 3 expansions from a basement office you didn't know existed. You can't do this to me. His voice cracked. It was pathetic now. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached into my drawer and pulled out a key. I placed it on the table between us. It's for my old Civic. Reliable. Paid off. No maintenance issues. His eyes widened. You're joking. Bentley's being towed as we speak. Company asset. And you're no longer part of the company. Check the paperwork. The window behind him gave a perfect view of the parking lot. The tow truck had already hooked up the car. It looked oddly small from up here. Like Nathan. This is revenge. He hissed. No. This is accounting. I reached for my tea. This is what balance looks like. You stole. Irreconciled. He sat down again. But slower this time. Like the weight of the truth was finally pressing into him. My mother is devastated. She had to cancel her country club membership. That must be difficult for her. Almost as difficult as being told for 10 years that I was just lucky. That I should be grateful for being part of the Dawson name. I paused. You remember telling me I wouldn't be taken seriously without your last name. He stayed quiet. I leaned forward. Turns out, my name was the only one on the paperwork that mattered. His eyes flicked toward the key again. You can't expect me to just walk away. I don't expect anything from you. That's the difference. I've stopped needing permission to exist. He opened his mouth to speak. To defend or beg, I couldn't tell which, but I raised a hand before he could finish. You said I'd be nothing without you. But you were wrong. I became everything because you weren't watching. For a long moment, we just sat there. He looked around the office. The name on the wall. The silence that now belonged to me. His shoulders slumped. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. And I said nothing. Because sometimes, silence is the only answer someone like him deserves. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and cold air. I sat on the plaintiff's side. Even though I wasn't the one who filed the lawsuit, Nathan had done that claimed emotional distress. Reputational damage. Financial sabotage. He looked stiff in his off-the-rack suit. One hand twitching over a legal pad he hadn't written on. His new lawyer kept glancing at me like I was something they hadn't trained for. Your Honor, my client has suffered undue harm. The attorney began. Miss Dawson's secret acquisition of assets and concealment of business dealings constitutes misrepresentation. I didn't flinch. The judge barely lifted his eyes. Interesting claim, he said. Dry. Miss Dawson, do you have a response? I stood slowly, straightening the charcoal blazer I wore like armor. I do. Your Honor. But it's Miss. Not Mrs. Not anymore. Nathan's face twisted, but he said nothing. I approached the stand and pulled out my phone. Would the court be willing to hear a recording? The judge nodded. I pressed play. Just smile and look pretty. That's all you're good for. I can replace you anytime. The audio was grainy, but clear. The courtroom shifted. Chairs creaked. Eyes darted toward Nathan. That was at the Thompson Gala. I said, and the same night he lost $50,000 gambling at an underground casino. Objection. His lawyer barked. Overruled. The judge replied. Without hesitation. I walked back to my table and opened the first folder. Bank statements. Loan documents. Internal memos. My attorney, Rebecca, handed them over in neat sequence. Here's the proof of gambling losses. Unauthorized withdrawals from the family business. And attempts to access my private accounts, none of which he was entitled to. Those were joint accounts. Nathan interrupted. No. I corrected. They were my accounts. You just assumed everything I had belonged to you. Rebecca stepped forward. We also have documentation of asset transfers from his sister's trust fund, and the forged vendor contracts used to justify missing funds. The judge scanned the files. His expression, tightening. Mr. King, these records are deeply concerning. Nathan shifted in his seat. She tricked me, he said, voice rising. She pretended to be this simple wife while building an empire in secret. I turned to him. Steady. I showed you my business plan. You laughed. Used it as a coaster. His lawyer tried to recover. But the room was already shifting. The courtroom no longer belonged to him. You never asked what I wanted, I said softly. So I took it. I took back what I built. I took back what you spent. I took back what I let you believe you controlled. Rebecca closed the final folder. Your Honor, we request full enforcement of the original asset division. There has been no misconduct, only recovery. The judge leaned back. Expression unreadable. I've seen enough. Mr. King, your countersuit is dismissed. All existing transfers remain valid. The court recognizes Miss Dawson as the rightful controlling owner of all named assets and entities. Nathan deflated. There's no other word for it. He sat back in his chair, suddenly small in a room where he once thought he ruled. As we stood to leave, he looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years. You used to be quiet, he muttered. I paused. You wanted a silent wife, I said, gathering my files. What you got was a silent CEO. And she just won? The apartment building on West 73rd didn't look like punishment. It was clean, quiet, surrounded by trees, and sat comfortably between a park and a grocery store. I'd bought it 3 years ago as part of a long-term investment strategy. I never thought I'd be renting it out to my former in-laws. Vivian called first. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. She asked whether the lease agreement could be adjusted, just for a few months. She said. The transition had been hard. I listened. I nodded. And I said no. The rent was fair. Market rate. And managed by a third-party property team. She'd have to speak to them. I offered no special treatment. That part of my life, the one where I bent to make others comfortable, was closed. Sophie came in person. She looked different without designer heels and curated outfits. Just jeans and a blazer too big for her shoulders. She held a folder against her chest like a shield. I know I have no right to ask, she said before I even offered her a seat. But I need help. I want to start something of my own. A boutique. Sustainable. Small batch fashion. Local designers. I've done the research. I asked her to sit. Then I opened my laptop. I already knew about the application. The loan request had come through a bank I owned quietly through Dawson Holdings. The proposal was solid. Better than I expected. Your numbers are good, I said. But this isn't charity. If I invest, it's because I expect a return. Clear terms. Regular reporting. No skipping steps because we share history. Tears welled in her eyes. But she nodded. I don't want pity, she whispered. Just a real chance. Then you'll get it, I said. But you'll earn it. That's how business works. She stood to leave, pausing near the door. Why are you even helping me? After everything, because I know what it's like to be underestimated, I said. And because unlike your brother, I understand the difference between revenge and justice. She left quietly. I watched her go, feeling neither victory nor bitterness. Just clarity. Not everyone needed to be punished. Some simply needed to learn how to stand on their own without stepping on someone else to do it. The rooftop was glowing with soft string lights. The skyline flickering beyond, like applause, held just out of reach. I stood near the edge of the garden, a glass of champagne in my hand, surrounded by people who finally saw me, not as someone's wife. Not as the woman behind the wine table, but as the CEO whose name now shimmered behind the glass lobby wall. Dawson Global. The launch party wasn't grand in size, but it pulsed with intention. Investors, employees, partners who once only knew me as Claire, my fictional assistant. They came with curiosity, then stayed with respect. Raphael moved through the crowd, fielding media requests. Jasmine handed me the latest press mention on her phone. They're calling you the Velvet Hammer, she said with a grin. I smiled back. Better than Nathan's wife. He arrived late. Of course he did. He waited until the speeches were done. Until the music dipped low. Until he could walk in and pretend he hadn't been watching from the shadows. He held a bouquet white lilies. His mother's favorite. He looked smaller in the doorway than I remembered. Elena. Please, he said. Just 5 minutes. I didn't answer right away. I watched the way he shifted his weight, still trying to control the moment with silence. I finally met his eyes. What's left to say? I made mistakes, he said. I was wrong about everything. About you. I need help. I nodded once, then turned to the table and gently placed my glass down. You don't need me. You need to learn how to be someone when no one is covering for you. He didn't move. I didn't offer more. You said I wouldn't be taken seriously without you. And now, here I am. He opened his mouth again. But I raised a hand. I built my company the way most women build their dreams, in the quiet, in the margins. After dinner was made and everyone else was asleep, I built it in the space you left empty when you thought I had nothing to offer. And I kept every receipt. Security approached quietly. I nodded. He stepped back. Defeated. Still clutching the flowers he never got to hand me. Through the elevator glass, I watched him ride down, disappearing floor by floor. Later that night, I stood by the windows of my office. The city below me, the air warm with summer's edge. I saw the old Civic pulling out from the curb, the one he used to tease me for driving. Now it was his. The Bentley had long since been returned to the leasing company. I thought about the nights I used to cry in that car, parked in grocery lots, after charity events, where I'd smiled too much and spoken too little. I thought about the woman I used to be and the woman I had quietly, fiercely become. He always said this house wouldn't exist without him. And now he's right. Because he's not in it.